start today talking about the FDA risk-based device classification. FDA has 4 categories that they slice and dice products into based on their risk. The first is class 1 that makes up 45 to 50% of the market. These are low risk products like examination gloves, handheld surgical instruments. Then it's class 2 moderate risk products that make up 40 to 45% of the product codes that include blood glucose test systems, infusion pumps, wheelchairs of certain types, surgical masks, which we're going to talk about more in depth in a minute. And then in class 3, which is the high risk devices that include heart valves like implantables, any kind of cerebral stimulator, those types of devices make up 5 to 10% of the product codes. And then you've got unclassified products that are pre-amendment that really don't have a classification per se, because the FDA hasn't gone back and classified them. So you really have to understand what the FDA expects for those, which is also defined in the product code. An example of a product code is FRO for wound dressings that contain a drug. Those are still considered unclassified products. Okay, so then from there you have to understand how each product classification overlays with the type of controls that's involved. So general controls are defined by the FDA, and they include establishment registration and device listing in the FERLS database, along with good manufacturing practices defined in 21 CFR Part 820. And that's what we all know and love as the quality system regulation that defines what the requirements are that you have to operate under. And then for class 1 devices, there is a subset of class 1 devices that is exempt from the good manufacturing practices and the quality system regulation, with the exception of complaints and records. So then when you move into the next level of controls, there for class 2 and class 3 devices, there's a level of controls called special controls. And these include particular labeling requirements. They may have mandatory performance standards. They may require some type of post-market surveillance. So there are a number of special things that apply to the majority of class 2 and class 3 devices. And then there's a subset of class 2 devices that's also exempt from special controls. And then adding on yet another layer of FDA controls for class 3 devices. In most cases, class 3 devices require a pre-market approval application with the FDA. But however, there is a subset of PMA of class 3 devices that is 510K exempt. I'm sorry, they're exempt from PMAs, but they require a 510K instead of a PMA. So it's a really odd category. And last I checked, I think that there were only 14 class 3 devices that were in this kind of odd exemption area that only require a 510K. Okay, do we have any? So then, long story short, about how do all these controls and classifications stack up, and how to understand the exemptions, is that there are all kinds of ways the exemptions can stack up and overlap based off of the product classification, and you really have to know how to read and understand the regulations to really understand your exemptions. I have a lot of class 1 customers that misinterpreted the exemptions that applied to their product, and either got their product stuck in customs for weeks while they had to figure it out, or didn't have the right quality system controls in place.
All right. I have an observation and a question. My observation is I will never understand this, and I should just ask you. And
that's kind of the point. It's complicated.
My question is, would you kindly go over general again? And you may have discussed this, and forgive me, folks on the phone, but I was inviting others to what I think is an important conversation. I'm sometimes asked, just because I have the group and that people think I know things, they say, I have a something, I think I'm FDA exempt, so I don't have to blank, blank, blank.
Yep.
What does FDA exempt mean from a what you have to do and what you don't have to do standpoint?
So this is the most misunderstood exemption category, is what applies and what doesn't apply when you have exemptions. And so no matter what,
specifically a class 1 exemption, because that's a bandage, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so those are the people who think that I don't really have to do anything.
It's a low risk product that can include like elastic bandages, examination gloves, handheld surgical instruments, irrigation devices. There are some types of syringes. There are again, about half the products fall into class 1 devices that the FDA product code database.
All right. You have something to add?
Yeah, one thing that people confuse, they say, oh I have a class 1 exempt product. Well, it is exempt from 510K, but it's not exempt from registration. It may be exempt from GMP, but I think the mistake they make is it's a class 1 exempt product. I don't have to do anything, and that's not true.
I think the word exempt means I don't have to do anything.
Yeah,
that's what exempt means to me.
Well, it means you don't have to do some things. It doesn't mean you're exempt from everything. So no matter
a marketing communication expert help them with the wording.
Look here. So in the TAN, no matter what, you have to do all 3 of these things. And then it's only for a very, very small set of class 1 devices that you may not have to do just this last part here. And even for that, you still have to do complaints and records management.
Okay, so even the exempt people have what should be considered a reasonable amount of work, at least from a QMS system standpoint.
Yes. A small amount of work.
Okay. Ask Michelle is what she said.
It's small for Michelle.
Yeah. And this is something else that I find that a lot of class 1 people who are specification developers, and they have their product manufactured overseas and shipped to the United States for distribution, that even if you are in this category where you're class 1 and you're exempt from a 510K, you're exempt from special controls, you're exempt from GMPs, but you still have to register and list, your contract manufacturer also has to have a registration and listing. And if it doesn't, your product's going to get stuck in customs. So you can see here on this chart, what it's supposed to communicate is no matter what, there's no category where you literally don't have to do anything.
But Michelle, is it never the other way around? That you have customers who say, how do I do all these special controls? And then that you say, well, you're exempt, you don't have to do it?
Yes, oddly enough, I have a customer right now that has a new app, like phone app for posture correction, and it falls in a general wellness category. And I'm like, congratulations, you're under enforcement discretion, because the FDA has chosen not to enforce regulations or require registration and listing for general wellness products. And he's like, oh, but I want to submit a 510K because I want the FDA to clear it, because I want to be able to market it and say it's FDA cleared. And I'm like, that's not a thing. You can't just decide to submit a 510K for a product that the FDA does not regulate.
Yeah,
That's funny. That's
we have
not
about
a
the same
thing.
thing. We have a 510K approved product, and one of our OEM manufacturers use it for neurofeedback. And neurofeedback as an application is 510K exempt, but they just want to have it as a, I don't know, marketing thing or so.
Right.
But if you say you're not, you're exempt, but you still say, I want to have 510K, do you then have to walk the whole mile? Do you have to do everything, or is it?
So that's what I explain to people regularly that have a product that's not regulated, or a class 1 product that is regulated but doesn't require a 510K, is that your product code that you fall into dictates what your regulatory requirements are. And if there is if a product code does not exist, like in this case, a product code does not exist for a posture correction application, you can't just submit a 510K. Then you're in what the FDA calls de novo, which means of new. And a de novo is a much more serious undertaking than a 510K. It requires clinical data. It's a more extensive review time. You have to do this extensive benefit risk profile of your device. It really is a lot of work, and you have to have a very specific indication that makes you clearly a medical device. So in this case, I told them about the general wellness device for the posture correction. I said, you're going to have to tie your application to a specific medical condition that it treats. And you're going to have clinical evidence that your posture application makes a difference for that particular medical condition.
I don't know about everybody else, but I find myself wanting to sit up straight.
Gives new meaning to scoliosis.
Exactly. So that would be exactly the type of thing. If they wanted to say their application helped, improve the condition of scoliosis, that would be a new medical indication that FDA doesn't have a existing product code for, and they would have to turn in a de novo application for that. And it's like, why would you, financial, like how much money do you really think that you're going to make off of whatever the device is that's going to justify going through this de novo process just to be able to say that I'm FDA cleared?
Let us
Does that
continue.
make sense? Those are great questions.
I have 2 questions that have come in, but I'm sure you'll address them just for reference. Mm-hmm. Sue Carr wants to know if you can go over the STEP program, STEP, mm-hmm. And Jonathan Saul wants to know how EUA affects and fits in this framework. I'm sure you'll address both.
Yeah, I'm gonna get to the EUA for sure. I have some slides on that. And so I'll save that one for later. But the first question about the STEP program, that's a fairly new program.
What does STP stand for?
Yeah, off the top, I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it is basically a new program where the FDA is trying to allow people that have technologies that are less risky than the current standard of care or the current devices available, that to bring their products to market in a more expeditious manner because they have a better benefit risk profile. Larry, did I get that right?
Alan Cooper to the rescue with Safer Technologies Program for medical devices, and Joe Hage with the FDA.gov link for the same.
Yep.
In the chat messages.
It might be helpful to think of this as an extension of the Breakthrough Device Program.
Exactly.
There were some devices that didn't apply or weren't eligible for breakthrough, and the STEP program allows safer devices, but there's an existing treatment out there, so those new products can get some attention and get to market faster.
Rob Packard, everyone.
Okay.
I have one other comment. In general, Michelle, spot on for, if your product is 510K exempt, there's not really any point in trying to submit a 510K, but there are some companies that in order to sell product in their country, they have a much better shot at being able to sell the product and get bids for the product if they have FDA registration and approval. And for a 510K exempt product, it puts them in a tough position because their country will say, well, do you have FDA approval? And they say, well, they don't give it because it's a 510K exempt product. So there are some companies that will file a 510K even though they don't need to, just so they can get a piece of paper proving that they don't need to. They will also do all kinds of crazy things to try to trigger inspections. The FDA in general won't go to a foreign establishment to inspect for a class 1 device, but these companies need an inspection because sometimes just having the registration isn't enough. They actually need to prove they've been inspected.
Thank you, Rob. Michelle?
Okay. So no matter what, you have a battery of regulations that apply. Kind of the bread and butter of the regulatory system is 21 CFR 820 for quality system regulations, along with labeling and medical device reporting. But again, like we talked about with general controls, they are everything. Everybody is subject to the establishment registration, the device listing. And then it's never okay to adulterate or misbrand your product. But these are all the things that you're responsible for understanding, regardless of how your product is regulated. Okay. And so I made a slide to the point of our discussion. Even if you thought you hit the regulatory jackpot and your class 1, your 510K, and your GMP exempt, you've got to have your establishment registration, your device listing, and at least complaints and quality records. And so does your contract manufacturer.
Your marketing friend says this slide should be shared in LinkedIn.
Okay. Make it so, Joe.
Okay.
Okay. So now we're going to go through a mask example, and I have been using this example for 4 to 5 years before this COVID thing has happened. So I'm going to talk about how masks are regulated underneath normal circumstances, and then we're going to talk about how masks are regulated underneath the emergency use. So where do you start for to understand your product? Well, you start with the FDA databases, and I usually always start with the product classification databases, but there are a dozen or so places that you need to look, including the FDA establishment registration listing, the FDA 510K database, and there's a number of other ones that are helpful. So when you put just the word mask in to the product classification database, how many results do you guys think? How many instances of the word mask, how many product codes do you think contain the word mask? Is that Larry laughing? Because I can't see my camera.
I guessed 47.
You're not totally incorrect.
Okay.
And this is something we learned just recently, is that not only is it's between 14 and 16, but it makes a difference with which search tool for the database. If you use the quick search, it's 16. If you use the advanced search, it's 14, because one is using the exact word and one is using if the word appears in a larger word like masker or face mask. So you've got between 14 and 16 results to sort through. So this is what that looks like, and you can tell the difference of which search mode you used. And so this is all the list that you have to consider. And so how do you start figuring out, this is simple, right? It's just a face mask. So how do you start figuring out which one of these product codes applies to your product? Well, you have to know what your intended use and indications for use is. What are you trying to claim here? And if you're trying to say it's a comfort mask and it's just a commercial product, it's like the things you buy at Home Depot, well, that's not even a medical device. If you're trying to say that this is a surgical mask and it's supposed to protect people and healthcare workers from getting infections or getting, fluid penetration on the mask, then that's product code FXX. If you're one to say that this is a surgical mask and it has an antimicrobial agent to kill bacteria, then that's a different FDA product code. If you want to say that this is a pediatric and child mask, then that's a different product code. If you want to say that this is a respirator and it's N95 NIOSH certified, FDA has no role in the clearance and approval of just if you're saying it's just a N95 NIOSH mask that's for commercial purposes. But if you say this is an N95 for surgical purposes, then that has a different product code. But you have to meet both the requirements for NIOSH and FDA. Oh.
This slide says, ask Michelle. Yes, it just says ask you.
Mm-hmm. And this is causing a big problem right now. If you look at, I'll save my soapbox for in a minute. So all the things that you can learn from a simple product code, and bear with me because I'm going to just delete this. This is supposed to be animated and that part is not working because of the webinar. So, so if we just keep it simple and we stick with just the basic face mask and a FXX, you have got all the things that you can learn from just knowing your product code. Most people really underestimate. And this is where I tell customers, you don't have to have a detailed design or a prototype or be even close to being ready to what you think is ready for submission to understand the regulatory requirements for your product. All you have to tell me is, Michelle, I want to make a mask and here's what I want it to do. And I can go and tell you all of these things about your product. You can know your device classification. You can understand what submission options are available. You can know if it's GMP exempt or not. You will know the regulation number, and by knowing the regulation number, you understand what the applicable controls are, which we talked about earlier, being special, general, etc. you can understand and how the FDA has defined the intended use. You can know if it's eligible for third-party review, recognize consensus standards, and recognize consensus standards really inform are one of the most valuable things that's available in the product code database, is because you see what the FDA has defined as minimum requirements for required testing and design specifications. And so that can really inform up front what your product needs to do and what the test specifications that it needs to meet. And if you don't know that early on, you may create a product that's not capable of meeting the FDA specification requirements. And then if you can't meet those test requirements, you can't get product clearance or approval. Okay. So let's start breaking it down. So what a simple product code can tell you. So again, we're keeping it simple. We're sticking with the FXX product code. Right off the bat, we know that a surgical mask requires a 510K. We know that it is regulated under 21 CFR 878 4040. And we know that it is a class 2 device. We can go down the rabbit hole and click this hyperlink to 878 4040 and just understand how the FDA has defined this product. So we're going down the rabbit hole now. We can tell that 878 4040 is regulated as the FDA defines the intended use. Now, this is important because I see people who have done their own research and they pick product codes because they think that this description up top, this mask surgical, they understand it. They understand the regulation. Oh yeah, this is my product code. That's what my product does, without actually reading the definition. And then their intended use or claims that they're making are different or beyond how the FDA has defined that product. So that's the first thing that you really need to make sure is that the product code verbiage and the intended use match up with what you're claiming about your product. The next thing to know is that the regulation may have more than one classification scenario in the actual regulation. And each classification scenario may have a different product code. For 878 4040, for surgical apparel, would anybody want to hazard a guess how many product codes fall under just this regulation? Entertain me. Just throw out a number. Oh, would you say over, under 5?
Over 5.
Over.
Over, under 10?
Over.
27.
24.
Oh, Joe Hage was so close.
Yep, 24. That is why it is so crazy right now under the emergency use of people doing registrations and listings under the wrong product codes with the wrong exemptions. There are 24 products that are regulated underneath, and it goes everywhere from surgical booties and caps to gowns, surgical masks, N95 respirators, the whole spectrum. So you really have to read the actual regulation and not just randomly pick a product code that you think fits. So you can see here now, if you are an actual surgical gown or mask, that equals a 510K. unless you are a surgical N95 respirator, and then you don't have to do a 510K, even though it's a class 2 device, if and only if. So going back to our geometry, if and only if statements, if and only if these things are true, that you have biocompatibility, that you have non-clinical bench testing that demonstrates the characteristics of the flammability of your product, and that it is appropriate for the intended use. And the testing must also demonstrate fluid resistance. There's a specific ASTM standard for that. There's a specific CFR for flammability. And then, in addition to all those things, it has to be NIOSH certified, which is an independent organization from the FDA. So you have to be able to check all those boxes. You have to have a design history file that has all of that information in it, and you have to have a full quality management system to be able to bring a surgical NIOSH respirator to market underneath that exemption. I am also seeing facilities that have brand new establishment registration listings, overseas facility, brand new, that are filing underneath the product code that MSH that is 510K exempt, because you can that's another long story. They're filing underneath this MSH product code, and they're brand new, and there's no way they have had time to do full biocompatibility testing, to fully characterize flammability, to fully do their fluid resistance testing, and to get US NIOSH certified. So people who have brand new registrations and listings under MSH have misinterpreted this regulation and are misbranding their product. The other thing I see a lot right now is people who are bringing product class or listing under the code LYU, which is the code for basically everything else. And you can see when you actually read the regulation that this is supposed to be for apparel other than surgical gowns and masks. It specifically says it's not a gown or mask. And people are saying that they're doing registration and listings under the product code LYU, and they are saying it's a mask, and this product code is supposed to be for booties and caps and face shields. So that is also misbranding your product. And those are and so those face masks, the face shields, the booties, caps, those kinds of things, those don't require a 510K. That was a lot. Does anybody have any questions?
I think we should just say, ask Michelle after. I mean,
Do what?
honestly, I know I'm not the guy who does the regulatory, but it was just so like, just ask Michelle when it comes time to, because 24, which of them, is it this or that? It's just too much. Too much, darling.
Well, and you know, that's the point of this example. A mask is simple, right? And this is one of the most complicated regulations, most comprehensive regulations to understand. And I'm it's very upsetting to me right now, because our healthcare workers and now our general population are trusting that these products that are available right now are going to keep them safe. And so these people who are misbranding their product in an effort to say my product is FDA registered and listed, and so it's safe, are misrepresenting and putting people's lives in danger. I mean, there is a reason why masks or why the regulation around them is so complicated and so tiered.
I have a question about the biocompatibility.
Yes.
It says you have to demonstrate it. How hard is that in the United States? Because under EU, it's more or less a risk management issue. So you can decide for yourself if it's if you have demonstrated the biocompatibility. Like if all the parts that I'm making this mask of are biocompatible by itself, if you really want to prove that your product is biocompatible, you have to test the whole product, because the production process in itself can add things that make it not biocompatible anymore, like rough edges or something. How is that in the States?
Well, the FDA also recognizes, similar to Europe, the 10993 set of standards. And so they typically expect full biocompatibility reports on the finished product. Now, it is possible, not just for a company to do it, but to use like an actual biocompatibility expert, that if you have got the full biocompatibility on all of the raw materials individually, and you can make a scientific and technical justification where you have analyzed the entire manufacturing process and all the chemicals involved with it, and that you say that you can prove from a scientific perspective that nothing could have altered that the original biocompatibility profile. There's a possibility that the FDA will accept that.
As a matter of fact, the 10993 has become publicly available because of the COVID-19 mess, and it was a nice bedtime read. It also says that if you're more or less convinced that it's biocompatible, it's not ethical to do any animal testing on it, because you want to prevent animal testing also. So you're in a kind of split position. Do I test or don't I test?
That is a hot debate right now about being ethical to test on animals, but is it ethical to test on people just based off of a scientific justification? Because I guarantee you,
Well, some people
industry is so much more confident in their justification to not do biocompatibility because it's so expensive, that they are more confident in their assumptions than the regulators will be. So there's a lot of people that are going to make make justifications and turn it in and not get a clearance or approval because the FDA or the notified bodies are not going to concur.
I think that there's.
Excuse me, Rob. Jan has a question. I opened your mic, Jan.
Oh, I wanted to know where it talks about the specific ASTM and biocompatibility testing to be doing.
I'm getting there.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And then I also, because you said 10993 is open to the public, which one? Which dash number?
Unfortunately, only -1.
Yeah, so -1 just tells you how to go about it. It doesn't tell you.
Yeah, it doesn't say anything about all the individual testings.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
You wanted to add something, Robert?
Yes, I was going to say that when you speak with the FDA biocompatibility experts, there are two tests that they specifically do not accept rationales for, and those are sensitization and skin irritation. Those two tests, they won't accept most of the rationales that a European notified body would. Most of the cytotoxicity testing, toxicology tests, they'll accept a rationale of some kind. But those two particular tests, they repeatedly will not do anything to waive those two tests. And that's changed over the last 5 years. 2016 is when they came out with the guidance document for how to apply that standard. And that's when it started to change. And then they did some reorganization and hired some new people that are very rigid. And so you'll find no budging at the FDA. However, in this particular situation, we're dealing with something that isn't going to actually go in front of those people to be reviewed. So I think there's a lot of companies out there that are saying, this is a non-woven polypropylene mesh, just like the non-woven polypropylene mesh that I use for this other product over here that is 510K cleared, and it's made at the same facility, the same process, so it's biocompatible. And the FDA is not enforcing that that these companies do these tests and get animal testing before they ship them into the US. They can't afford to because they need to get the masks in. But at the same time, the more serious things are the ASTM tests for the performance of the masks. So there is some obligation on the company to use risk management to make their decisions on what they feel meets the requirements and what doesn't. But there's a lot of gray area here that would not be allowed in a 510K submission.
Right, and we're going to cover all of those, what masks looks like now underneath the EUA in a minute, but you're exactly right. It's not entirely a free-for-all under the EUA, and there still is some test obligations, and that in an effort to mitigate, that you don't have time to do biocompatibility on a lot of the materials that they're making this out of, the FDA is requiring people to just state what the materials are so that people can make their own risk analysis.
What kind of figures are we talking about for just sensitization and maybe skin irritation? How much does such a test cost?
It's typically about, rough numbers, about $5,000 for each test, and they take about 10 weeks. Depends on the lab, depends on the sample, but those are ballpark numbers.
Okay, so we've digressed a bit down the biocompatibility wormhole, and we could stay there forever, but we got to go back to the wormhole we were in. Okay, so we're going to keep going through the FDA product code database here. Another very interesting thing is the TPLC, or the Total Product Life Cycle Report. From that, you have got the ability to pick a year range that you want to see what products have come to market, and it will tell you for your competitors who has what manufacturers have recently gotten clearance, what the decision was, and then if you click through, it'll tell you what their 510K number was. It also tells you any device problems that have been reported underneath the medical device reporting requirements, and who's done any recalls. So now to Jan's point, one of the most hopeful things that you can learn from the FDA product code is the applicable standards. And FDA recognizes particular standards and calls them consensus standards. And you can tell in masks that there are 5 different standards that you have to figure out if, based off of your intended use, that if these standards apply or not. And these include things for the filtration efficiency, fluid resistance, a whole spectrum of performance requirements for masks that can vary based off of your intended use and the claims you're making, if they apply or not. So if you are developing a mask and you're trying to say that it is going to prevent blood spatter from, getting in your nose and mouth, and you have picked a fabric or a coating that can't meet this requirement in ASTM F1862, then your product can't be legally marketed. Any questions? So here's the tricky thing about recognized consensus standards is in the product code database, you are only going to find the ones that are product specific. So they're going to be about face masks or about surgical instruments or whatever it is that that product code is specifically regulating. What you're not going to find listed in the product code database is things that are horizontal standards, meaning you're not going to find biocompatibility, sterility, all these product features that your product may be sterile, but lots of products are sterile. And so you just have to know which consensus standards apply based off the method of sterilization. Jan was the one that asked me the question, how many devices are packaged? Like all of them. You're not going to find the packaging standards individually listed on the product code. So you also have to know to look in the recognized consensus standards database based off of your product features. Okay, anything else before we move into emergency use? Okay, so I created this tool just for my own sanity as I was starting to have, 7 to 8 hours a day worth of calls on people trying to bring masks in the market. Early on, there was a new EUA every few, there are I think 3 now EUAs that came out in about a span of 3 to 4 weeks, along with the enforcement policy that came out in the guidance document. So you had to really read and understand all 3 EUAs and that guidance document to make sure that you were fulfilling all the requirements of the EUA. Because again, it's not a total free-for-all. So, and it's all the requirements are based off the intended use. So we're back to, you really have to understand the intended use of your product and the product claims. So there are kind of 2 categories that are addressed under PPE for medical purposes. And that is if it's a face mask or shield that's not a liquid barrier, if it's a surgical face mask that is a liquid barrier, and then if you're trying to say it's a surgical NIOSH 95 alternate respirator. So there are a whole variety of kind of across the board right now. FDA is waiving the need for general controls being registration and listing. They are waiving quality system compliance. They are waiving UDI. But they do still require a recall and adverse event reporting. They are not requiring a 510K during the course of the EUA. But unless they change the regulations, which we just reviewed in detail, they will require 510Ks for you to be able to continue legally marketing your product after the EUA. So if you are just bringing a mask in that's not a liquid barrier and you're just saying this is just to cover your nose and mouth and it's okay for a healthcare professional to use it, then you don't have to do any testing. But you have to label your product with certain conditions about where it can be used. You can't make any claims for it. You have to list what the body contacting materials are. If you are trying to say it's a surgical mask and it provides a physical barrier to fluids and particulates, then you still have those exemptions, except you have to attest for fluid resistance per that ASTM F1862. You have to test for flammability and per this particular CFR, and that flammability has to meet these certain class 1 or class 2 requirements. And if you don't test for flammability, then you have to say on the labeling that this product can't be used in the presence of high intensity heat sources or flammable gases. So you can't make any claims about infection prevention, antimicrobial protection, etc. And you still have to list the body contacting materials. So then moving on to the surgical NIOSH N95 alternate respirator. This is that one that we spend a lot of time talking about if and only if you meet all of those test requirements, then you're not going to have to submit a 510K afterwards, but you are going to have to be fully compliant with the quality management system requirements and all the other aspects. You can indicate under the EUA that these products are for healthcare professionals and use in a healthcare environment. You cannot say that they contain a drug, biologic, or antimicrobial. You have to publish the intended use instructions. You have to meet the test criteria for the CDC alternate NIOSH or recognized alternate NIOSH test standards, or you have to have a medical device authorization from one of the recognized countries in the standard. So if it's not for medical purposes, the FDA basically says we never regulated these in the first place, but that you still cannot indicate that these are for healthcare professionals, that these are for use in a healthcare environment, or that they contain any drug, biologic, or antimaterial agent. Okay, and that brings us to unsubstantiated claims, which I've been touching on this whole time, is that any claim you make, include it like it's a physical barrier, or that it has this level of particulate filtration. All of those claims have to be substantiated with test data. And if you don't, you are alternating and misbranding your product. So that would be considered false. So you have registered underneath the wrong product code and said that your mask is a class 1 device. It's intended for a booty. That is false and deceptive. You're also going to see a lot of labeling for masks that's misleading, and much less that does not bear adequate instructions for use right now, particularly for respirators that are supposed to have fit testing. You know, people are just slapping labels on things that says that they're KN95 or FFP2 and slapping FDA logo, misusing the FDA logo. I'm also seeing a lot of things come across my desk right now that have the FDA logo on the box, which could imply that the FDA was involved with clearing the product, and they weren't. All of those things are considered misbranding. Okay. Are there any questions I did not get to?
Specifically,
I have a question. Can you hear me?
John and who's speaking?
Oh, hey, it's Shannon Clark.
Oh, hey, Shannon Clark.
May I ask a question?
You may.
All right. So I am involved with a group that is importing potentially millions of masks. And I think on one of the boxes, it actually might be gloves. They actually do have an FDA logo, which is not supposed to be there. And do you happen to know how much trouble an importer could get into if they import a box that has FDA in it. These Chinese companies love adding that logo, and should we add a little white label over that, or what do you think about that?
I think that's a great question for Larry.
Well, the FDA has the option of releasing without examination, and certain low-risk products will go that way. But the bottom line is if they examine the product and there's FDA anywhere on it, it's going to be detained and refused unless the labeling is corrected. So you take a chance. You might get through if they don't look at it, but if they do look at it, you won't get it through.
I could show up at the port with my Avery labels and then place them on all the little FDA logos for a million crimes. Okay, great.
It would be wise to contact the foreign firm and have them correct the problem at their end, so when the product arrives here, there's nothing that has to be done to it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and even if it was to make it through, there's still the risk that the FDA will take some enforcement action against the company at a later date.
One of the things that
importation company.
I would probably say the person whose name is on the box that's representing the product like that, which sometimes is the importer.
Got it.
One of the things that I've been doing with some of the companies that are trying to export out of China and other countries is to provide them with draft labeling so that they don't have to guess what's supposed to be on the box. That's particularly helpful to make sure that it matches the information for the importer. You don't want to have the wrong address or the wrong name on there. And that can also help when customs is inspecting the product to make sure, the consignee matches the registered importer and the shipper matches the registered manufacturer. You can also eliminate problems like this FDA label that they like to put on, but I've even seen them putting it on the product itself, not just on the labels.
That's a problem.
Yeah, it definitely is.
Two things. One, Michelle, if you're comfortable doing so at this point, do you want to show the kind folks at home what you're working on with your SNBA?
Yep.
And while she's getting ready to do that, we have a new friend in Reinhard who recently joined our little band of friends. Why don't you introduce yourself? And Joanne, I've clicked to have you put your camera on if you can figure out how to do that, because we'd like to meet you too. Go on ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. So can you hear me good? Great. So I'm glad being here in your group for the first time. My name is Reinhard Kohler, and I'm based in Freiburg in Germany. And I'm been in the medical tech industry for over 20 years. Worked most of my career time at one of the big 10 companies, the company Stryker, which is also located here in Freiburg. And since 3 years, since 2018, I founded my own consulting company, which is called MedSyscon. And you will also find me under LinkedIn with my name, Reinhard Kohler. And I'm supporting my clients when it comes to questions of building up a quality management system, doing regulatory work to bring their products into international markets. And I'm mostly focused on software, means software as a medical device, all the questions around software, which also comprises risk management, documentation, the usability, and for sure it's the 62304, which is a kind of the Bible for all software questions. This is my focal point, and I'm supporting customers also for getting prepared for FDA inspections or for audits like MDR here from the notified bodies, and these kind of works should be very familiar to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, my pleasure. Welcome. And we have a software as a medical device channel, so be sure to check that out.
Okay.
And if anyone on the call doesn't know, and I'm not at all, is the European Union body, Michelle, help me out here, overwhelmingly decided to push back MDR a year with 1 dissent, and I think 636 in favor. I saw that on Monier's LinkedIn Live today. Anything to add, either of you, on that? Anyone?
Well,
Michelle, if you want to share your screen again.
yeah, so my opinion on that, though, I think people are going to get super excited about it, and I don't think that it's going to be nearly the boon to industry that people are thinking. I think that they were already behind, and that they're going to see that they have another year, and that they're going to just sit on it instead of using that year to catch up and really get prepared.
I agree with Michelle's comment. We're finding that auditing organizations are going ahead and scheduling virtual audits instead, and saying they're going to follow up with maybe a 1-day on site, and they're not going to have an opportunity to get 2 shots at this. So the companies that said they were going to be ready, they're going to have to be ready, or they're going to have major nonconformities in their audits.
Joanne's camera does not work, but Joanne works, so why don't we open her mic, and why don't you introduce yourself to the group? If I can do that. Your attendee is, oh, there she goes.
Hi, sorry I cannot be visible at this time. What I do, was that what you're looking for? Well,
anything you care to share.
I've been trying to get my own business up and running. I have worked for the last 25 years in medical device, pharmaceutical. I have been in API. I've been blood banking, biotech. I've been in a lot of different areas, anywhere from the QC lab to quality assurance. And it's due to being in the jobs a lot. I have been trying to get my own company up and running, and looking at also doing coaching, and I am a certified Gallup strength coach. I have another training course that I took in coaching. So trying to bring that in a little bit too, to help companies become more efficient. My strength is actually in quality systems. So I've also been working on doing some training modules. I finished doing a validation training module, because one of the things that I found throughout my career is that people in these large companies tend to be siloed. You know, they're doing one little aspect of validation, or it's not connected with the design control, and they don't understand that connection because they've only been working in manufacturing and they're not in the R&D. So I'm trying to make that connection so that people can see the broader picture of what validation really is, to connect it also with risk assessment and things like that. So for companies who are new, like, you know, you even look at making the masks, they can understand how these systems all interconnect. So that's what I've been working on.
Well, thank you for joining us. And your marketing friend says we need to work on your pitch, because that was a lot to keep in my head.
Yeah.
But in a word then, if the folks on the phone were to call Joanne for one thing, would it be quality systems?
Quality systems, absolutely. Organizational
Quality systems, absolutely.
there.
Okay. Bring us back, and you can see the leftover slide that I copied over from something before. So Shannon Clark, lovely though she is in her branded shirt, is not today's presenter. It's Michelle. Please continue.
Yeah. So I've been working with my friends at SNVIA on making a template that's specific to each type of intended use for the masks And so it can quickly, in 10 to 15 minutes, generate an EUA application. And then it also has built-in checks so that as people are sitting there with and uploading their labels, that they have to verify that their labels meet all the labeling requirements. They have to upload all the required testing. And if they don't have any of those pieces, it notifies them that they're not eligible for the EUA, or it automatically generates an email with the template attached and the body of the email. So
Cannot see screen.
I am sharing now. Oh, no.
Oh,
All right, what are you seeing?
Nothing, not your screen.
That's what I was afraid of.
Center has
So,
control.
what happened when I first started sharing my screen, I told it to share PowerPoint only. And now every time I click it, it's not going to anything else except for PowerPoint.
Okay, let's see.
Maybe I log out and then log back.
No, I've made myself the presenter, and now I'm going to make you the presenter and see if we can make this work again.
Okay.
And if she disconnects, it's been great talking to everyone. No luck?
Here we go.
Yay, luck. Well, we can see.
So this
All right,
is in.
Create a new project.
Yep. So again, this is I've partnered with my friends at SNVIA, and we've built this over the last couple of months. So you just enter project name. I'm calling this Motley Masks.
And only for masks?
Right now, it's only for masks. Okay. I'm going to submit this on Monday. Select template, and we've done so far the 3 masks that are indicated for medical purposes. I want to use the NIOSH one because it's the more complicated. I have to indicate am I marketing this just for the duration of the public health emergency, or do I plan on submitting a 510K?
Didn't you teach me that the whole premise of EUA is, yeah, but I mean to stay in market afterward? You're supposed to at least fake it?
No, you just can't stay in market afterwards unless you also do bring it to market legally. So you upload your logo.
Okay, let's assume that happens. I imagine that's optional.
It is optional, but there are aspects that are not. So you just fill in your basic information, your model numbers. And this is, you can override this, but this is like just the basic indication for use for a N95 filtration equivalent. And you have to tell how many you can bring in, when are they going to be available. And now this is where it gets interesting. So you have to upload your labeling, and then it goes through and it makes you certify that your product meets each one of these criteria, and you have to click accept and verify that your product does indeed meet all of the criteria for the EUA, and you have to upload your IFU. So you indicate there's an option, even though it's not required. The FDA has asked for several of the mask types. If you do have a quality system that's compliant with 21 CFR 820 or 1345, and then if you do, you have to upload your certificate. If you already have a marketing authorization, we already have those fields in here. If you say yes, you have to upload or indicate your certificate number. And then see here, I have no and no, so I changed it back to no, and it tells me my product is not eligible for the EUA. So I'm going to change this one to yes. So this list of CDC recognized NIOSH alternatives. And then the software already knows that only these two out of this Brazilian standard are eligible. And then I have to upload my certificate of conformity. Okay. And then I have to check what type of testing I have to have. So I have fluid resistance and flammability.
That language start typing is confusing to me. Just a note for later.
Yeah, it looks like that's nice and wet out.
That's for you to type in any comments or test results or whatnot. But so then I click generate preview, and the software has generated the content that's needed for the emergency use. It's inserted the product labeling. It has gone through this verification checklist and put it into the submission, and it has indicated which testing that I have done. And then it has attached everything that I've uploaded as objective evidence into the appendix of the body of work. And then that is going to get put into, we've also generated a, email that you'll click a button and that file will get attached to an email. And then that email will has got all the wording in it of what you need to communicate to the FDA, and then the file is attached with all the technical information to submit. Ta-da!
So elegant.
It's going to have a bill.
Keep it up, though. Do keep it
The
up.
whole package comes with, verification services where somebody on my team also reviews your labeling and your test results. And then we can send the email on your behalf as well. And for me, this is a small way where I can, to the best of my ability, try to help filter out all of the falsification that's going on right now.
I'll note that, I really appreciate it, and the heart you put into it. You got emotional talking about it before, about people mislabeling to make some money and having a material adverse effect on some humans in the form of death.
Right. And I also, though I couldn't build it into the template because it's technically not a part of the EUA, but my team is going to be trained on recognizing all the misrepresentations on labeling, like misusing the FDA logo, saying the word NIOSH on it when it's just a NIOSH alternate, different things like that we're going to filter and kind of kick the applications out, or give them feedback at least that say, hey, these things are wrong and at your own risk. And
I just attempted to unmute the entire staff, but they have to unmute themselves, it appears. I'm not sure. I'd love to, if the folks gave Michelle some feedback on what they just saw about that software, if it looks useful, if you have suggestions for improvement. And Michelle, again, if you are able to put it back up, you can do that.
Michelle, what's
Anyone
pricing for
feedback?
the software?
Who's speaking?
This is Jonathan Saul.
Hey, Jonathan.
It's $9.95 per template, and you get 10% off if you purchase more than one.
Thank you.
On Tuesday, our COVID, so everyone on the phone likely knows I now have 2 weekly. Tuesday is about COVID, and Friday is potpourri. It just so happens that today's potpourri could have easily been Tuesday because of how relevant it is. But I'll be sure to share this with that community, which already has 260 people in it, which is nice. And I got some very nice feedback today from someone saying how material and helpful it's been in making connections and getting her stuff that she needed. So that was rewarding. On Tuesday, we're going to feature and again, and we're going to talk about serology, which is a term I first heard this week, Tuesday. Never heard a topic on Tuesday. So Shannon, tell us a little bit, and if anyone on the phone is also well versed in the same, how they might contribute to educating us on Tuesday. Ms. Clark.
Yeah, so hey, it's Shannon Clark from UserWise, and we've been involved with a bunch of EUAs and kind of similar stuff to Michelle. I gave the talk on Tuesday about EUA serology. So it came up, the idea that there's all these serology tests coming out, the idea of using blood. You could, kind of like the whole spirit of Theranos, you can do a finger prick and then know at home whether you have COVID-19 or not. So it's sort of the holy grail of diagnosing or even screening for COVID-19. So there's 2 EUAs came through this week for serological test kits, and it sort of looks like a birth control test or a pregnancy test, sorry. Looks like a pregnancy test where you have sort of a result from that blood sample. And right now the FDA is being very strict. They're saying no home use, professional use only. They're also allowing through Appendix D of their guidance that serological test kits get sold in the United States with no emergency use authorization and just labeling that just says, well, don't take this result seriously. And I'm dumbing that down a lot, but basically it's like there's labeling on there that just says, oh, it might not work. So there's a lot of controversy about these tests, and I'm excited to talk more about it on Tuesday.
Thanks. We've hit the 1.5 mark. Lou had another question. I'm trying to unmute your mic if you want to ask it yourself. If not,
I want to ask Michelle. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I want to ask Michelle
Yes.
if there are any other countries or EU have something similar in place like the EUA.
So Europe is coming out, like they've made the standards free, so they're doing different things, and it's my understanding in Europe that it's kind of a country by country thing. I don't know of any other countries that have a formal process for emergency use. Everybody's kind of coming out with, you know, we heard Arthur Brandenwood speak last week about Australia, and says they don't have a process for emergency use, but at the same time that they just do instance by instance. So they published a very specific guidance about regulators that met certain specifications, not regulators, ventilators, and that they only would allow ventilators manufactured in Australia at that met this very specific guidelines. So I am not aware of any other countries that have such a specific procedure or policy for emergency use.
Thank you.
Here, Elizabeth, I'm going to make an exception and open your mic. There you go. We can hear you if you speak. Ms. Nickel Cross. Technical difficulties have me read this aloud. Michelle, this is an extremely impressive software approach. Thanks for sharing this. I'm looking at a site now where you will not yet find it, said her website guy, who has to write copy today.
Email me, Michelle@leanraqa.com.
And you are both on Slack, which is far more efficient than email. I've been trying to tell you.
Nope.
Okay.
I don't
Anyone
think so.
else? Jose, I don't know how to actually pronounce. Usually it's Jose, but there's a U in there and it confuses me. But Mr. Garza is our co-channel, but he specializes, if I'm not mistaken, in medical device distribution in Mexico. Is that right?
Hi, Joe. Hi, everyone. My name is Josue Garza. It's Joshua in English.
Sway.
That's easier.
Okay.
Josue with a sway.
I like it.
Yeah, so I work at a medical device consulting firm in Mexico. So we look for market approval for international and national distributors and manufacturers. So that's getting market approval before COFEPRIS, which is the equivalent of the FDA. And we are also a host company, an authorized representative for international companies in Mexico. And yeah, our main approach is, our main goal is to get market approval, but we also make connections with local distributors because that's a very big request that we get from international clients when getting to know a new market like Mexico.
Thank you. And he'll be our Friday guest on the 8th of May. So look forward to that.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Of course, no, you'll be teaching us stuff we don't know, and that's good. If no one has anything else, I think I'll say goodbye for now. Wash your hands, don't touch your face, and safe out. I really enjoyed this, and I'll tell you, as someone who is starved for hugs, this is as close as it gets. I really appreciate thank you, love. I really appreciate my virtual family here. Thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend. Bye for now.
Cheers.